Hello and welcome to this webinar on the science of face and word recognition. I believe the participants can join now on their own, and we should begin now because it's in the interest of time that we follow our schedule. So to begin with, I welcome all of you to this session. My name is Bhuvnesh Avasthi. I am the Director for Research and Training at Orange Neurosciences in Canada. But a little bit about my background, why I'm talking about this topic today and how it is relevant to our session and what you will likely learn here. So I've started my research career in India with a degree in life sciences and a degree in consciousness studies from BITS Pilani. Following my early education, I moved to Australia to do a PhD in the area of perception and behavioral science at Macquarie University in Sydney. During this time, I also worked at the CSIRO, the National Science Agency of Australia, in the area of computational sciences. Following my research in Australia, I moved to the United States to do research in the area of emotion and meditation. I was at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, Northern United States. Now, following this work, I wanted to take a different approach, and I conducted research in a new area called neuroeconomics. This involves, the brain sciences as well as economics and decision making. This was at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, Russia. Following that, I worked in the area of embodied cognition and perception at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. And later on, I moved to the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, doing research on visual perception and decision making. During this time, I was also teaching at the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing. I was teaching master students courses on neuroscience and neuroimaging. Neuroimaging refers to the brain mapping methods, non-invasive methods primarily. This was in 2018 and 19, so much before any COVID or any such thing came out of that region. I was also teaching neuroscience methods to business and marketing students at the Copenhagen Business School in Denmark. Following Denmark, I moved to Canada, where I currently work in the area of cognitive training with a Canadian company called Orange Neurosciences. Towards the end of this session, you will learn a little bit more about this company. If anybody is interested, you can ask me more questions. But we'll stick to our session, which is mostly informative. How do we see faces and words? Now, why is this topic so important? The moment you open your eyes, you see people and objects. Either you see human beings, you also see animals and birds and plants. So living beings as well as inanimate objects. But essentially, when we interact with human beings, we use two kinds of methods. We recognize them by their face, and we use words. And in today's session, we'll talk about how we recognize, how do we see faces, and how do we see words, and what happens when there is deficit in face and word recognition. Now, to begin with, let's look at a fundamental question in human vision. Now, I have a question to all my participants. Does human vision work like a camera? What do you think? You can put your responses in the chat box. Looks like some people are saying that they can't hear me. I think some people can hear. Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. So does human vision work like camera? Geeta says no. Arvinder says yes. We focus more on certain things. Yes, Vandana is right. Most of you are right. Benedetto also says, I don't think so. Exactly. So yes, human vision does not work like a camera, because unlike a camera, we actually experience the image. So whatever you're seeing, you experience it. And the moment you see something, you also know what it is and where it is located. So you see the identity and the location very quickly. Of course, there are things that you see, but you don't recognize. And that's something that we will talk about a little bit in today's session. So human vision does not work like a camera because a camera does not experience the image, whereas we experience the image. We focus on certain aspects, as somebody correctly pointed out. Camera tells you something which is a picture of the real world, but human vision focuses on certain aspects. Now let's look at this and play a game in this context. If you keep your eye at one of the white circles at the intersection, you will notice, and without moving your eyes, if you notice that, you will notice that on periphery, the dots which are white start to turn gray. Does it happen to everyone? Any of the white circles, you keep your eye and do not move it. Keep your eye fixated there. And you will notice that the periphery, its surrounding ones start to turn gray. But if you go back to that gray one, it turns white. So essentially, it's your brain that is playing some tricks with you here. Again, another example. If you keep your eye at one of the intersections where there is a circle and keep your eye there without moving, the surrounding dots will disappear. Try that. And if you move your eye again to that circle, that dot appears, and the other one which previously was there disappears. Isn't it? So again, your brain is playing a trick here. Nothing is on the screen. Don't have any of those images that are actually changing. It's your visual percept that's changing. How many legs do you see in this picture? How many legs? Arvinder says 4. Okay, that's great. Any other number? When I count, I tend to get some 1. Okay, Benedetto says 1, Vandana says 5. So yes, we tend to have an illusion here of a number that is varying degrees from 4 to 9 all the way to 9. So different people see different numbers based on how you focus on the image. So essentially, how do we see anything? We focus on the image and we perceive information. Our brain processes information. Essentially, our visual system collects and processes information. So anything that comes in front of your retina or in front of your eyes actually passes through your eye and goes to the back of your brain. So the brain actually recognizes the external world. Why does it recognize this world? It recognizes to act, to remember, to optimize, to reduce conflict and noise. So it has to make sense of the world. It has to make sense so that it can operate in the world, so that it can efficiently act to reduce conflict, to reduce noise, and to look for things which are necessary for our survival and efficient functioning in a social context. So basic biology tells us that objects in the environment are projected onto the eye. Actually, the image is inverted at the back of the eye. So whenever you look at anything, the image at the eye level is inverted. And this information from the retina region, which is actually a collection of certain kinds of cells, we call them ganglion cells or bipolar cells. There are 2 kinds of cells, rods and cones. Now these cones are color selective. They're important for color vision in daylight. That's why we are able to distinguish colors. Most animals don't have this color vision. Mostly humans have. Rods, the other kinds of cells at the retina, they're important for night vision. We rely on them once our eyes have adapted to darkness. So this is a basic schematic diagram. You don't have to remember it, but just basic introduction so that you can follow through the rest of the information. So the light enters the eye, it is inverted. The image is formed, which is inverted at the retina, and 2 kinds of cells then collect this information and then send this information through an optic nerve here shown in the image. So the red one is the optic nerve, which goes directly to the brain, and brain processes information. When it reaches, as I showed you in a previous image, it goes to the back of your brain. So there are two kinds of pathways where this information further gets processed. We call them dorsal and ventral pathways because they refer to the dorsal and the ventral regions. So the dorsal pathway represents where things are located in the space. So if something is far away from you or near, this information is processed accordingly in the dorsal pathway. The ventral pathway gives you information about what you are looking at, whether it's an object, whether it's a face, whether it's a word, whether it's a human body or an animal or anything you want to identify. So identity specific information is processed in the ventral pathway, more towards the temporal region. When we talk about these kinds of stimuli or these kinds of things we see in the environment, faces are quite unique, particularly for humans. Compared to other animals that you see around like dogs and cats, primates and particularly humans rely on face information. These are biologically and socially very significant. Why? Because they provide quick information about the identity. You recognize people with a specific identity, who this person is, their gender, a male or a female, their age, whether they are young or old, what is their intention, what are they going to do, and are they happy or sad or angry, surprised or disgusted. So you see all of that information really quickly when you look at somebody's face. For most of us, this comes quite naturally. Now, faces are special. A lot of research has established that human beings have an early preference for faces. We seem to have an innate ability for face recognition. Now, a newborn actually prefers looking at face-like structures for a longer duration compared to non-face-like structures, shown here by the example. So an image which resembles, or a schematic diagram which looks like two dots and mouth and a nose in a structure format like eyes in the right location, the neonate will look most frequently, which has a face shape and simple features. Less frequently, they would look at something which has a face shape with scrambled features. The eyes and the mouth are not in the right location. And least frequently, they would look at the outline of a face-like feature. So right half an hour after birth, a neonate actually has a preference for faces. Now, there's a lot of research that shows that we tend to have automatic skills for face recognition. It does go haywire in some people. We'll talk about them in a minute or so. But let's look at how we recognize faces. There's established research that shows that we perceive faces at a single glance as a whole, rather than as a collection of independent features. So for most of us, in this image, you would see that it's a face rather than seen in the village. Similarly, most people will recognize a dominant percept as a face, and then they will see that it actually consists of a variety of animals. So there might be some people who do not see the face as a dominant percept. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just a condition called developmental face recognition deficit or developmental prosopagnosia. But we can ignore the term because it's scientific and not necessarily very relevant for today's session. I'm just going to tell you how face recognition is so unique for humans and is an innate skill. So for most of us, we will see a dominant percept of a face. If you don't see a dominant percept, you see the individual animals. That's also all right. You may have a condition called prosopagnosia. Now, faces are special not just in the case of human beings looking at other human beings. We have a tendency to look for face-like structures in inanimate objects or things that are not even biologically relevant. Things that are in our environment, we tend to have a dominant percept, like in these two images you would see in the cloud or any object you see in your environment. So there is a face-like preference. Our brain is actually making this up in a way. There may not be a face there because essentially these are inanimate objects. These are not animals or humans that have a face. These are actual objects that, of course, some of them created by humans, some of them occurring naturally. And we tend to see a face-like structure there. So we tend to have a predominance of face recognition skill that is quite innate. Yes, as I mentioned, a small percentage of people, around 2% of the people in general population, do not see faces here in any of these images. For them, it would be just a building with certain kinds of exhausts or windows there on the right side, or a mountain face or mountain-like structure, rock structure there, and the alarm clock or the sockets, the European sockets shown here. Now, faces also seem to have something called orientation selectivity. What does that mean? So back in the 1970s, researchers discovered something called a Thatcher illusion, or rather they created a Thatcher illusion, let's say. So if I ask you what's the difference between these two images, left and right, it would be relatively hard for most of you if you look at the face in this manner, which is inverted, right? It's really hard to detect what is the difference between the two faces because it is inverted. If I put them upright position, the so-called Thatcher illusion gets resolved. In this case, you can instantly see that the eyes and the mouth are inverted in one of the images. And this is much harder in an inverted condition, but it's much easier in upright condition. This showed that actually faces have an orientation selectivity. We tend to recognize faces faster and more easily when they have the right orientation. Again, this is sort of an innate ability. Most of us tend to recognize faces using these methods. Now, there is a specific area in the brain where faces are recognized. I mentioned, the input goes to the back of the brain, and some input goes to the dorsal region, some input goes to the ventral region. We have a specific area discovered in the 1990s, actually in 1997, from a team at MIT in the US. They found a specific area here shown by blue color. It's called fusiform face area, FFA, fusiform face area. This area responds more strongly to faces compared to other categories of objects. So this is a little bit on the temporal side in the occipitotemporal region of your brain. This is where face-specific information is processed. So I'm here showing your brain. These are images actually based on certain analysis using non-invasive brain mapping methods. So face area is unique in the brain. So most of us have this area a bit lateralized. The activity is more on the right side and less on the left side. Now, several people have difficulty recognizing faces. I mentioned a condition called developmental prosopagnosia. Of course, if you damage your brain, you will have difficulty. If you damage specific area, you will have difficulty recognizing faces. But this condition also occurs in other situations, other conditions like autism. But there is no brain damage in autism, but it is a developmental condition. People sometimes do not develop normal or usual or typical face recognition skills. So for these people, they have a normal sensation of visual nature. They can see, but they cannot recognize the objects they see. For instance, visual agnosia, now this is about objects. These people are able to copy these diagrams or images, but they don't know what it is. So irrespective of faces, I'm now giving an example of people who have a particular agnosia. It's called object agnosia, unique to recognition deficit regarding objects. They're able to draw these pictures, actually drawn by the actual subjects by looking at the image. They can draw the image, but you ask them what it is, they will say, I don't know. For instance, for the key, they don't know what it is. They can't name the object. Similarly, they are able to draw the pig, but they are unable to recognize what the pig is or which animal is this. Or similarly, a bird, which seems to be like a branch or a stump. Or when they're able to copy the image of a railway engine, but they don't recognize it as a railway engine, they say it's some wagon or some kind of a car. Now, visual agnosias are of variety of various kinds. Prosopagnosia, which prosopon refers to, a Greek word refers to face. This is a face identity recognition deficit. And one can see a face, but cannot recognize it despite repeated exposure. So prosopagnosia is a condition in which people can see the face, they can see individual features, they can see eyes, they can see mouth, but they cannot recognize the identity of a person. So they meet them every day, they spend time with them, sometimes they are family members, but they don't use face information to recognize them. So this is a condition, developmental in nature. Of course, there is an acquired version as well, where you damage your brain and you can't recognize faces. But it occurs in autism as well, where face recognition deficits known to exist, and people do not even orient towards faces. Many autistic people do not like looking towards faces, and there is a conjecture that perhaps typical face recognition skills do not develop in autistic subjects, in some of the autistic subjects. Remember, autism is a spectrum disorder, so not all people have similar situations. Sometimes they have difficulty, sometimes they don't have difficulty with faces. So this is quite unique. Faces have seem to be quite innate. Now I'll move to another section, which is about word recognition. Now, can you recognize or can you read any of those things on the ancient writing system? Anybody here can read those symbols and make sense of them on the left side? Quite unlikely, but most of us will be able to recognize symbols which are on the right side. Of course, again, the common point in both of them is unless you have not learned to recognize, you will have difficulty. So on the right side are the modern writing system. On the left side is an ancient writing system. These are symbols. Now, these symbols are also not easy to recognize in terms of, what do they mean, and you will not remember them because you need to learn. Now, compared to faces, word recognition or symbol recognition is quite a unique trait which humans develop. Compared to faces, this is not innate. So we need to learn to recognize words. When we learn to recognize anything, our brain cells make new connections. What does that mean? It means that the brain changes as we learn to read words. So of course, the brain changes as you learn to recognize faces as well, but face recognition is innate, whereas word recognition is not innate. You have to make efforts to learn word recognition. And when the brain changes, this phenomena or this situation is called plasticity, neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. Now, scientific research on word recognition says that recognizing and reading is not a single mental process. A variety of brain areas are involved in this process, and it involves many sub-skills, such as letter recognition. So in this case, S, C, H, O, O, L, these are alphabets, Roman alphabets, used in a variety of Indo-European languages. Right now, in this example, English language, we all had to learn this. It did not come naturally to anybody. Like face recognition, you open your eyes, you tend to orient yourself towards faces. And then as you grow older, as a baby, you recognize faces, especially you recognize your mother and people who are around you. In terms of letter recognition, you actually had to go to school and learn these things by heart. Many times your teachers were very helpful in helping you learn this rather quickly. But some people have difficulty regarding these. So letter and word recognition needs to be learned. Again, other brain areas that are involved in sound processing are involved in word recognition. So you have to also learn the knowledge of letter sound rules. So in this case, SCHOOL becomes school. So you comprehend that words. Many times we don't, for expert readers, we don't read the word with single alphabets put together individually, but as a single word, rather as a complete whole. And there are many other factors that are involved in word recognition. So how reading happens in the brain? As I mentioned, anything you see, the input first arrives at the back of your brain. In this case, for words, at the primary visual cortex, primary vision area. From there, this information goes to visual word form area. This area is near the face recognition area. You also learn about word pronunciation. So you learn the symbol and sound relationship and memorize it. And then you also learn about meaning. So different brain areas are involved in reading words. This is not an innate skill. This takes time. And for some people, this is an issue. Now, word reading is compromised in a variety of learning disorders. Today, I'll just touch upon some of them. One of them is dyslexia. In this example shown here with brain images, typical readers have activity in more brain regions compared to dyslexic readers. So dyslexic readers have difficulty making sense of a variety of symbols and meaning out of them. Now, some aspects, some conditions like autism and ADHD also have learning issues. They may be related to word reading, they may be related to attentional aspects of word reading or other visual pathways that are compromised in some of these developmental conditions. What can be done about this? Can we change our brain? Essentially, it's your brain that is making sense of this information. Essentially, it's your brain that is reading and operating in the world by speaking or making sense of the sound that is reaching you. So can we change the brain? Yes, the answer is yes. There is something called cognitive therapy. You can change your brain based on a variety of factors. Now, in the existing standard of care, with the 3 types of approaches taken, some of them have become inaccessible due to limitations of resources or time, and they have side effects too. For instance, drug interventions in ADHD have serious side effects, and standard one-to-one therapy can be quite expensive. At times, behavioral therapy and compliance training can also be hard and inaccessible. In lockdown, like pandemic situations, it can be hard to get access to a therapist. In this context, we offer a solution. We offer something called a read-on therapy, which is based on brain plasticity principles. This is the ability of our brain to modify itself to rewire. Now, read-on as a method uses a variety of factors. Particularly, it leverages the power of engagement. It boosts phonemic awareness. You can target specific brain areas and multisensory approach. You can also focus on eye movement and executive function skills. So there is existing literature that shows that you can train your brain for helping with behavioral remediation in dyslexia. So this is a paper from the team at MIT, neural deficits in children with dyslexia, ameliorated by behavioral remediation evidence from functional MRI. So actually brain changes can be visible using a brain mapping method, and magnocellular training can improve word recognition too. So you can train certain parts of your brain using a method like I'm suggesting or showing you today. It's called read-on. It's actually a artificial intelligence based cognitive reading therapy. As I mentioned, it's based on principles of neuroplasticity, where we target auditory, visual, and cognitive pathways. It's a patent pending technology. We have applied for patent. Comes in form of various games. So kids and adults can all play this. Anybody who would like to improve their reading and learning comprehension skills is welcome to try this. There are various types of gameplays. They're highly engaging. As I mentioned, they target eye movement, they target sound and symbol awareness. It improves attention skills, coding and decoding skills, as well as executive functions. Now, here's some of the examples of people actually using this program. This is a 15-week session. So first 5 weeks is cognitive therapy, and the next 10 weeks are reading therapy. And as you can see in this plot bar graph, engagement increases as people play through these games. We are collaborating with a variety of institutions across the world in North America and in India, as well as in Singapore, where we are working with schools as well as special education centers. We are also collecting research data with several institutions, and I invite you to join us. Parents and therapists are welcome to write to us for a free demo session of read-on. I can have a selective group where I will answer all the questions. I can show you all the details of this program for all those who are interested. For those who are interested in joining us for research, please write to me at my email ID. I thank you for your attention, and I will take questions and comments.